All right. Well, hello, everybody. I'm Molly Croll with American Clean Power. Very happy to be here. If you don't know, ACP is a clean energy trade association. We operate nationally. We represent all types of clean energy technology, including transmission, batteries, solar, storage, land-based wind, geothermal, and offshore wind. And in California, I have the pleasure of working with the 5 offshore wind developers who are leaseholders in the state. Very happy to be here today, and thanks to OWC for having me. So we had this same sort of procurement panel last year, and at that time we were sort of just on the heels of passing AB 1373, which for the offshore wind industry was a very landmark legislation enabling the state to centrally procure a set of diverse resources, and we'll be talking about that. We were also sort of at a time where we were super happy to see that legislation having been passed, but there was a lot of work remaining to be done. And we were in the middle of, or at the start of, the PUC taking that legislation and asking, what are the next steps of implementing it? So we're going to talk about that today. Also, just want to acknowledge we're sort of in this odd in-between place of having, some decisions made in terms of the authority to procure, but still being many years out from offshore wind procurement. So what does that mean for us? And I think we've heard from the CEO panel yesterday, there's a lot of advantages in having this time to be able to work through process, understand what should a solicitation look like, who should be involved, what things should we think about and look at in terms of lessons from other regions, what's unique for California. So to discuss this, very happy to have an excellent panel, and I'll let everybody here just introduce themselves briefly. Buck.
Well, Molly, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this panel. I think we'll have a good discussion. I'm Buck Cutting. I'm here to represent SMUD. SMUD is the utility serving this building right now and has been very forward in working towards the zero carbon goals. We're the 6th largest not-for-profit public-owned utility in the nation. A little bit about myself. I don't know how I stumbled into it, but I had the privilege of developing lots of wonderful renewable energy projects for SMUD, hydro, battery, the first transmission interconnected solar project we did, and then what I really cared the most about, to be honest, was lots of wind projects. So thank you for the opportunity.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Molly, for including me on this panel. And also wanted to give a thank you to Adam and the whole team here at the conference for highlighting some of the work of the Public Utilities Commission and giving us an opportunity to talk about the work that we do and how it relates to offshore wind. So my name's Leuwam Tesfai, and I serve as the Deputy Executive Director for Energy and Climate Policy at the California Public Utilities Commission. So in my role, I lead our Energy Division staff. So we have about 270 staff in the Energy Division who are advising our commissioners and our administrative law judges on all of the formal matters before the commission, as well as managing informal matters for the utilities and the load-serving entities. And so in particular, I'll be highlighting some things related to our integrated resources planning work, as well as the work that our transmission teams are doing. So thank you for having me.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm honored to be on this panel. Thank you for including me. I'm Dawn Wise. I'm the CEO of MCE, and we are a community choice aggregation provider, a load-serving entity, celebrating our 15-year anniversary this year. And we have a service area that includes about 1.5 million in the North Bay and the East Bay of California. And as the first community choice program to launch in the state, we've been able to operate a lot of energy efficiency programs and do a lot of procurement. And to the developers in the room, I just want to let you know that we have invested in $3.9 billion so far in California-based energy, most of it renewables, and we've built about 950 megawatts of new California renewables to serve our load and created about 6,500 jobs. So we're excited to talk about offshore wind on this panel. I'll pass it to Mike.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Colvin with Environmental Defense Fund. I lead up our California Energy Program. And again, thank you to Molly, thank you to Adam and the rest of the folks at OWC for including us. I just wanted to say off the bat that EDF views offshore wind as a critical resource to helping ensure that our grid is affordable, that it's decarbonized on time, and that we help keep the lights on, that we maintain system reliability. And so as we're talking through our procurement practices and other things on this panel today, I just wanted to make certain we're coming back to the frame of, and we're doing this so that we can keep the bill affordable. So we're doing that so we can keep the system clean, and we're doing it so that we can keep the lights on, we can keep the reliability going.
Thanks, everyone. So Leuwam, we'll start out with you. Last year on this panel, we talked a lot a bit from the developer perspective on the importance of the procurement opportunity being at scale, such that there would be a pathway to procurement for multiple commercial scale projects. And also you heard yesterday from the CEO panel how important the 7.6 gigawatt authorization in the PUC's decision was. But of course, that was never a foregone conclusion. So could you talk a little bit about what AB 1373 directed the PUC to do and how you went through the process of coming to the decision last year?
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Molly. So AB 1373 did a number of different things, but I'll be really highlighting two. So first being central procurement. So the central procurement mechanism is a tool that the Public Utilities Commission is able to leverage in order to help the procurement of certain long lead time resources. It's a tool that's available to us for a limited amount of time, and so there's a 2035 date that's involved. But the legislation required the Commission to make its first need determination by September of 2024, and so I'm very proud to say that the Commission adopted that decision in August of 2024 on time, and that decision created the opportunity for procurement through the Department of Water Resources of 10.6 gigawatts of long lead time resources. So 7.6 gigawatts of offshore wind, but then also 1 gigawatt of geothermal, and then 2 gigawatts of long duration energy storage. So one of those gigawatts being for a 12-hour or more product, and then the second gigawatt being related to a multi-day long duration energy storage resource. And so the way the decision set that out actually put the procurement of the geothermal resources and the long duration energy storage resources first, and then created that second tranche for the 7.6 gigawatts of offshore wind. And so that procurement will start in 2027, and these are for resources to come online between 2035 and 2037. Now, a bit more specific, to that legislation, it also required us within 6 months of making that need determination to make that specific request to the Department of Water Resources. And so our president, Alice Reynolds, did send that letter making that request to the Department of Water Resources in February. And so that has now been communicated to the Department of Water Resources. The other thing that I wanted to highlight as part of 1373, and there are several other parts of AB 1373, but just really to aid in this conversation about offshore wind, was actually a rebuttable presumption requirement related to transmission that had been identified by the CAISO. This is specifically the need for transmission that's identified by the CAISO that is tied to the resource planning and the integrated resources planning proceeding. And so that rebuttable presumption will come back to the Public Utilities Commission and be used in our permitting process or our certificates of public convenience and necessity. And so as we know, in order to develop offshore wind in California, there's going to be a need for transmission to be developed and permitted. And so that's another key part of AB 1373 that I'll talk a little bit about later.
Wonderful, thank you. And Michael, EDF was involved in the proceeding looking at the 1373 need determination. We're supportive of the role of that program for offshore wind. Can you talk a little bit about your perspective, why central procurement is an important tool for a resource like offshore wind?
Sure. So I think there's two things I wanted to make certain that got communicated. First one is a recognition that long time lead resources need more runway, hence the long lead time. And a central procurement entity can say, look, we're going to start that now, and here are the milestones. And sort of reflecting back on what Commissioner Reynolds just said in the panel right before this, or the presentation right before this, and what Leuwam's talking about in rebuttable presumption, there's sort of a theme here of how do we hit milestones, and how do we hit milestones in such a way that will reduce risk, breed more confidence, be able to say, look, here's where California is. We are leading. We are going to go big, and we're going to do this because it's in the best interest for our customers. And so the framework that the commission adopted in authorizing a central procurement entity, the framework that the legislation required to designate the commission to do all of that work, in my mind, it's really about how do we reduce risk out of the system, how do we hit milestones, and how are we really transparent of this is going to happen first, this is going to happen second, this is going to happen third, and we all are on the same page about it. And I think that so far that's been really successful in sort of getting risk out of the system. The broader point that I think a lot of us are probably feeling in the room right now is there's a lot of uncertainty that's been injected from the federal government. We can't control that, but California can control things of we get to buy our electricity, we get to set those mandates, we get to set the milestones, we get to do everything else. So let's focus on what we can control and make it so that we have lots of ability to sort of squeeze out the uncertainty as much as we can. And I think that's what we were looking for in that part of the proceeding. That's what I think the commission adopted. I think they heard us on that front. And I'm excited to kind of see what happens next.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Dawn, maybe sort of setting aside the central procurement program specifically, but focusing on offshore wind, can you talk a little bit about MCE's interest in the resource? What is appealing? What questions do you have as you think about your procurement opportunities in the future?
Absolutely. So MCE has been seeking carbon-free resource adequacy in earnest since 2018. It is hard to find, but the generation profile of offshore wind that's very continuous, very consistent, very predictable is really an opportunity for us to transition away from the fossil-based supply of RA that we're currently relying on. This is a game changer for MCE, but beyond that, it could transform the energy market across the state. And as an example, when we're buying energy in the evening peak hours, prices are high, prices are volatile. This could erase that volatility. It could transform RA prices in the market. And what's maybe the most important of all is the fossil fuel-based RA that is currently supplying a lot of our reliability needs and impacting communities across California could vanish. So that's why we're interested.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing. And Buck, you're responsible for keeping the lights on here in this room, but
Personally,
across the city.
It's a team effort.
Yeah, you alone. Are you guys looking at offshore wind? Is that something, even
Well,
though you're
Dawn
not
stole
on
about
the
half
ocean?
my thunder because I talked it through the organization because we'd had some discussion on these questions and they brought up the same thing, resource adequacy and a much better fit for our load profile. We're a stranded inland utility, and when it's hot in the whole valley and everybody's looking for power in the afternoon, and solar is wonderful, low cost, but it goes to bed at night. And everybody else wants a cool house at night. And so there's that natural conflict. And so offshore wind, even wind out from Solano County, really helps fill that goal, but offshore should be even better. So yes, we are definitely interested in offshore wind and have always considered it down the road. I mean, one complication is, I'm not sure how many of you guys, I think there's our former grid operator out here somewhere, but you have an import limit, and so you have to make sure it has deliverability. Without deliverability, you don't get the RAAK resource adequacy, and you have to make sure that you can get it into your system and your system can be receptive. So, but there's lots of discussions about the need for transmission. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what the three of you have been speaking about is, as in the role of ensuring there's a portfolio for the long term that's reliable. It's not, just about having enough energy. It's about having energy at exactly the right times of day and really all hours of the day. We're also seeing the shift in sort of focus of what are the most critical hours that we need to be solving for. And yes, we have opportunities for solar and for storage, and they can help, but the need for diversity and the need for, as Michael was talking about, having options across diverse resources, given nothing is guaranteed in terms of our future over the next 15 years. So really appreciate that. Want to talk a bit more on process. So Leuwam, you mentioned the letter that President Reynolds sent in March to Department of Water Resources to kick off the program design and development. What are the next steps for the PUC and DWR? Are you going to remain partners in the central procurement process, and what are the concrete to-dos in the next year or two?
Yeah. So, next steps are really working with DWR on those pre-solicitation materials. And so we have been working very closely with them and making sure that all of the stakeholders, so these are the load serving entities, of course, like Dawn and others, but then also the publicly owned utilities who have an option to opt into central procurement, have a clear understanding about how this new process is going to work. Through that process, we're also going to be staying engaged with the Procurement Review Group, which was part of AB 1373, and it's going to be a key part of the process so that people have visibility into how solicitations are getting built, what kind of responses are coming in, because the key part is at the end, Department of Water Resources, as we know, especially for offshore wind, but others, it was they have the authority to procure anywhere between 0 and 7.6. 7.6 is the max, but they'll be coming to us with what these contracts look like. And so we're going to be taking a close look to make sure that these contracts are in the best interest of ratepayers. And so, something that I highlight here is that, when we did our initial analysis and our need determination, we saw that to be cost effective, we really need to see offshore wind coming into that $60 to $80 a megawatt hour price range. This was based on the NREL ATB data from 2023. We are seeing that those prices are going up, so we really want the developers to be sharpening their pencils and really working to make sure that we get the best prices for ratepayers, because in this part of the process, when you come back to the PUC, we're going to have to really be looking at cost effectiveness of these resources. So if we see prices coming in at over $100 a megawatt hour, that's going to be a real challenge here. So I really want to be able to emphasize that, yes, the next steps are going to really be with the Department of Water Resources, but everything has to come back to the Public Utilities Commission. This was a key part of AB 1373 was, having this look that the Public Utilities Commission does. And we do this already with the investor-owned utilities. The CCAs do that through their own boards, but we do this with the investor-owned utilities, have these procurement review groups and have stakeholder input. And so we'll be doing that again when it comes back to us.
Yeah, thanks. And from the industry perspective, we talk a lot about, the time of solicitation is when things get really real on prices. That's when companies will know. And when the PUC and DWR will. But another thing we're thinking about is, given the lead time that Michael mentioned, there is a long time between potentially signing a contract and a project coming online. So one of the lessons we've been thinking about from the East Coast is there some need to build in some flexibility, knowing that during that time period, which could be 8 years, could be 9 years, to modify or update some certain terms to respond to that lag in time. So lots to think through, obviously. Michael, you have had the pleasure of serving on a procurement review group in different settings. In thinking about the process, stakeholder involvement in 1373, what are the questions that stakeholders and agencies and industry should all be thinking about?
Yeah. So we're using some jargon here, so if you'll indulge me, let me explain what a procurement review group is. It allows a non-market participant like EDF, somebody who does not have a financial stake in the outcome, but just wants to see a good result happen, look behind the curtain, see what the bids are, see what the pre-solicitation material is going to be, see the negotiations, have an observation status, but kind of be able to understand, here's what's happening. We do that because as a state, we let this kind of behind the scenes curtain look happen, because if all that happened was a contract was signed by a developer and a load serving entity and put to the PUC, we would be protesting every single contract and trying to do discovery, trying to figure out what's going on. Is this the right deal? What protections were put into it, everything else. The idea is that if we're involved from the beginning and we say, these are the criteria that we're looking for on behalf of my membership, it's going to be the environmental criteria, but it could be a whole range of things. we are going to be able to cut down on the amount of litigation. We're going to be able to say, yes, this is a good concept. This is what we think makes sense. Go ahead and sign it. You're not going to get an objection from us. Or if you are, here's how we're going to limit it in scope. So having that kind of conversation and sort of breeding confidence is going to be really critical. So as we're developing the procurement review group, it's a little bit of a different entity because it's the Department of Water Resources. They're normally a really large buyer of electricity, but now they're doing something, not just serving their own needs, but they're doing something where they're going to be allocating costs onto the rest of the state, and they have to be thinking through, is this the right deal? Does this make sense? And so I think of our role as both sort of a conciliary role of, okay, here's how you can do this, here's how you want to breed the confidence, and also that same sort of pre-litigation avoidance of litigation moment. The one other thing that I think is going to be really critical that I'm hoping to be a part of this conversation as part of these procurement review groups is there are a lot of costs that are out there that need to get addressed, but not all of them need to be ratepayer costs that show up into a power purchase agreement. And so thinking through as a collective, as a community, this is really important. We need to do this research. We need to do this blank and whatever it is. But let's not include it on the power purchase agreement evaluation. Let's include it somewhere else. Let's all have agreement that we're going to find the money for it somewhere else. Versus, you know what, this really is a ratepayer benefit. This is something that ratepayers really are going to understand, and this is how we're going to do it. Leuwam just put out a pretty bright line saying, if prices go above a certain amount of money, the commission's going to laugh us out of the room. And so we need to think through as a community, this is important to go into the solicitation criteria, and this is important to get figured out some other way. So my hope is that non-market participants will be able to help advise that solicitation pre-process to help figure out where the missing money is going to come from.
Yeah, thanks. Buck, one of the other interesting things AB 1373 did, though, for those who don't know, it sort of covers the IOUs and the CCAs as far as the central procurement happens on their behalf. The POUs, on the other hand, have an option. You can choose to participate in central procurement or not. So has SMUD considered, would you ever use that procurement mechanism? What kind of appeals to you about having that option with respect to offshore wind?
Well, yeah, SMUD, the guardrails are reliability and cost. And as you know, we pride ourselves on keeping our costs low and achieving our zero carbon goals. So if the costs are there, SMUD is interested, at that first level. Does that make sense? I mean, I don't...
Yeah, no, that's...
and there are, as we discussed, attributes to the power. Resource adequacy is very expensive and hard to get right now. Yes, we got a lecture on it. And this should have, wind always has far better resource adequacy than solar. And so if the cost is there, the deliverability is there, and the attributes are there, it would make sense.
So if DWR shows you something good, you might go ahead and sign up. And Dawn, as a CCA, I mean, you were founded on customer choice, a bit of self-determination, but is there anything about the central procurement program and the idea of sort of banding together across LSEs that's appealing to you, and especially for a resource like offshore wind?
Yes. Well, you're right that our mandate is to serve our customers. We also have an obligation to procure supply for our customers. Now, sometimes there are exceptions to that, and that can throw a wrench in our planning and our procurement. But what I'd want to say about central procurement specifically is I think it needs to be considered carefully and not overused. If we put too many eggs into one basket, we're going to likely drive up costs, and we're definitely going to create more risks. I have some chickens, and if I leave the whole basket in one place, the birds are going to probably knock it over, and there you go. I think that what works best in the market and in most realms of life is having a diverse set of buyers and a diverse set of sellers, and that's what really drives costs down and eliminates risk, because if you lose one egg out of the basket, you can probably continue moving forward. But if you lose the whole basket, then you're really set back a long way. I do think that there's a benefit in creating economies of scale, and that can be done in a couple of ways. Central procurement is one way of doing it. Joint procurement is another way of doing it. Some of you may know that there is an organization called the California Choice Power Authority that has banded together 8 CCAs to do joint procurement. In another example, MCE has procured 280 megawatts of a solar and battery storage facility in San Bernardino County under a 15-year contract. That was a long lead time contract. When it came online in 2023, it was one of the biggest battery storage facilities in the country. We took 280 out of the 480 megawatts, but there are 6 off-takers. So we kind of served as the anchor tenant, as if you will. We have a strong credit rating, a strong track record, and it allowed the project to move forward with others still participating. So that's an example of how joint procurement can work. We just need to be very aware of the potential risks of putting too much effort and time and focus into only the central procurement, because then we're taking away the ability of other load-serving entities to help achieve the state's goals.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it's, sort of an interesting challenge with offshore wind. You talked about, having a large number of different supply options, a large number of different buyers. There's a limited universe of offshore wind sellers. There's only 5, so does it make sense to have competitive procurement in multiple places for 5, or consolidate competition in a vehicle like central procurement? So interesting to think through all those questions. Want to zoom out a little bit to how the state is thinking sort of more broadly about resource planning and the role of load-serving entities. Leuwam, can you talk a little bit about the work the PUC is doing on, I'm going to say the acronym, RCPP, which I think stands for, correct me if I'm wrong, Reliable Clean Power Procurement Program?
Yeah, that's right. And I think just as I jump in here, it's a great opportunity to emphasize what Dawn just said. Our load-serving entities like MCE and others are going to continue to be doing the vast majority of the procurement. Central procurement is a time-limited and very specific tool for resources that we haven't seen enough procurement at scale. And so that's why it was very limited to these resources: offshore wind, geothermal, those different types of long-duration energy storage. But the vast majority of procurement is going to be occurring with our load-serving entities. And even for the future of offshore wind and future procurement of offshore wind, well into our 2045 goals, we need to be looking to our load-serving entities like MCE, SMUD, and others to be out there doing that procurement. So I really want to emphasize that really important point. But looking at RCPP is a staff proposal that went out in April of this year. It was really building off of a staff paper that came out in 2022, looking to create more stability in our resource procurement across all of our load-serving entities, and also thinking about the various procurement requirements that our load-serving entities are working towards. So we've mentioned integrated resources planning, we've mentioned resource adequacy, and then there's also the Renewable Portfolio Standard, RPS. And so they're all trying to do procurement across these 3 different state requirements. And so RCPP is really creating a framework to smooth out and have a regular cadence for that procurement. For those that aren't familiar with how procurement has been done in the past at the Public Utilities Commission, we would have these orders that said things like, load-serving entities go out and do 11,500 megawatts of procurement. And some people call this lumpy procurement planning because there are these large amounts of procurement that these orders were being included in, these orders. And so that creates a big scramble in the market of all of the different buyers out there trying to go out and meet their procurement obligations. Because for those that aren't familiar, these procurement obligations for the load-serving entities, they have compliance requirements, and there are penalties if they don't meet the procurement requirements that the PUC is setting up. So RCPP is really trying to bring alignment across the different types of procurement that the load serving entities are doing and kind of stabilize and routinizing those requirements so that they come out in a way that the load serving entities are able to do a more managed way of procurement and interacting with the market. The Public Utilities Commission had a staff workshop on Friday, really well attended, the highest attendance of any IRP workshop that we've had, over 200 attendees. So we know there's a lot of interest in this topic. And given the staff paper that came out in 2022, we know that load serving entities have been looking for this clear guidance and this stability. So we were really trying to be able to deliver on that.
Yeah, thanks. And Dawn, is the proposal that you're reviewing now providing the sort of model for certainty combined with flexibility that you're looking for?
Well, I really agree with what Leuwam just said about aiming for stability and trying to avoid these short-term procurement orders, because that drives up cost. That's the most important thing, I think, for us all to be thinking about, is how can we minimize costs for ratepayers? And when we have a procurement order that says everyone needs to buy a huge amount of geothermal within 2 years, well, if you're a geothermal owner, you might want to increase your prices a bit. You might want to not agree to terms that are as fair as you might otherwise. So we don't want to distort the market. We want the market to behave normally. And so setting standards and maintaining consistency around those standards is really important, and we support that. And I think that, if we're able to do that through the RCPPP, it will help avoid these market shocks that we've seen in the past. But I think we also need to be careful that the RCPPP is not overestimating the needs in the market and creating so much of a buffer that we're buying power that isn't needed. That's going to add costs for customers too. So we need to do careful modeling. We can't say, well, we're not sure, so let's throw in an extra couple thousand megawatts. Our customers are going to pay for that. So we need to be very thoughtful. And I think engaging, making sure that the CCA comments and recommendations to the CPUC are being heard, and other advocacy groups, folks that are not-for-profit organizations really looking out for their customers, are going to make recommendations, particularly those that have experience working in the market. I think we have a lot of advice and recommendations that can help keep costs down and make sure we're not over-procuring. We also need to make sure that the RCPPP isn't creating conditions that shift costs from one load-serving entity to another. We work very hard as a buyer to keep our costs down through efficient procurement and careful procurement with experienced developers. And we want to make sure we can pass savings along to our customers when we do a good job.
Can I make one more comment?
Sure.
Just since I'm here, I want to make sure everyone knows that we are taking comments right now on RCPPP. So this is really the right time to engage. And a lot of the staff, I can see them right in front of me, are here to talk to you, answer any questions. And we really want to hear everyone's feedback so we can get this right.
Wonderful. And Buck, you're not within the PUC's IRP proceeding, but you have to look at resource planning all the time. And as Dawn said, a lot of that is about kind of looking at what are the models saying about which resources are available, how do they perform, what is our demand going to do, what does that load shape look like, and then how does that all play out in terms of cost of those resources versus benefits. Is there anything in sort of typical way we do modeling in California that you think might be missing?
Ooh, that's a tough question. I could just say, so I used to feed potential projects to the resource planners, and everything, projects disappear, new projects appear, things slip in time, and so it's the art of trying to plan around moving targets. We work at the direction of the board, and so we'll have the goals of the organization, and then we try to plan the resources to meet the organization, and then the next year everything changes and you start the process all over again. So we're not driven so much by outside influence on how to do it. I was told resource adequacy is one thing we are constantly looking for, and that is something we really work hard to get. But as far as the planning, it's really to meet the goals of the organization. Right now it's our zero carbon plan, which the goal is to get zero carbon by 2030. Goal, moonshot might be a better word, but we're, every year we try to come up with a plan to meet that. I hope that addresses your question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. All right, zooming out even farther, talking about how, procurement, as we've said, connects to the broader functioning and needs of the grid, which includes both the transmission system as well as the market created by the CAISO. So I want to talk about that a little bit. Starting with Leuwam, do you want to talk about GO 131?
Yeah, I'd
Used to be
happy
D, now E, and what's the significance of that for offshore wind?
Yeah, thank you. So the Public Utilities Commission in January of this year made an update to our transmission permitting general order 131. So E, so that we've had the iterations B, C, D. We're now at E. I really called this a once in a generation update because the last time it occurred was in 1994, and so it was really a great opportunity for us to be able to do that. There was some legislation a few years ago, SB 529 from Senator Hertzberg, which directed us to do this and also helped to give us some critical resources to be able to do this key undertaking. And then the proceeding to do this work also was also the proceeding where we were able to implement the new rebuttable presumption component of AB 1373 that I mentioned earlier. So that's how that kind of ties together. But to these key themes that we've been talking about of affordability, for example, making sure that we have our transmission permitting processes on having very transparent and clear timelines is a key way for us to be able to make sure that resources are affordable for customers. And so a key part of doing effective permitting, any kind of permitting, but transmission permitting as well, is really to kick off like the stakeholder work and the environmental work well in advance. And that's something that is a big highlight of this update to General Order 131. And so this general order will also be the framework that we use for any of the development of new transmission, like to bring resources from the North Coast area down to load centers as well. So that's why I think it's important for this conversation. And some of the components that I wanted to highlight there included, we're creating the opportunity for applicants to do some pre-filing work and create draft CEQA documents so that you can front load the environmental permitting process, environmental review process, and also have a key stakeholder engagement earlier on. So communities who are typically interested in how transmission permitting is going can get that early engagement with those project proponents. In addition to that, we're also requiring pre-consultation, so requiring these applicants to be consulting with tribes, local communities, environmental stakeholders as well, so that once we're getting these applications at the Public Utilities Commission, we have the key stakeholders at the table, we have some key components and understandings that are in place as well. So those are just some things I wanted to make sure that people in the room knew are innovations that the Public Utilities Commission has been doing to be able to streamline permitting processes, which we think will also help to drive down costs as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And transmission panel is up next, I think. So don't want to steal their thunder, but certainly when we're talking about central procurement and procurement of long lead time power purchase contracts and development of transmission, which is also naturally very long lead time, that's so essential to be able to line up those processes. So the work you're doing and making sure transmission can be done efficiently as well as procurement, very important. Michael, I think I'll throw the last question to you, and then Dawn, you can speak to this as well. The state has been participating in what we call the pathways process for multiple years, which is discussing how to expand a regional market that includes California. And this includes active legislation by Senator Becker. So how does offshore wind fit into conversations about regionalization?
It's a great question, and to peek behind the curtain, Environmental Defense Fund is one of the co-sponsors of this bill. We've been pretty actively involved in the entire pathways process. So I guess I wanted to make 2 points here. The first one is California has the ability to lead on offshore wind. We have the access to these 5 lease sites. We have them authorized by BOEM. None of the rest of the West Coast states have that done yet. Could happen at some point. We have 10 gigawatts of lease area authorized. The central procurement entity is authorizing 7.6 of that. What do we do with the other 2.4? One on-ramp could be the RCPPP, maybe eventually. Another one could be a regional market. Could Oregon, could Washington have access to offshore wind through the California lease sites? Is that something that we want to be thinking through and develop and say, how do we make the pie bigger? How do we make the buyer pool, as Don sort of talked about, how do we make that bigger? And how do we recognize that, wait a second, Dawn, as she's trying to serve her customers, really needs offshore wind from 5 to 9 p.m., but she might not need them from 9 to 11. She might have another resource that's covering it. Well, can't we share some costs and some resources with another balancing authority that is out there who says, wait a second, I'm desperate. I really need something from 9 to 11. Offshore wind is going to be perfect for me. Let's do some revenue sharing. Let's do some cost sharing. And so I think about a regional market as a way to decarbonize the grid faster, to enhance system reliability, and that resource sharing to help get costs down in the most efficient way that we can. One of the benefits of a central procurement entity that we're thinking about right now is the reduction of transaction costs. As Don was talking about the Joint Powers Authority that the CCAs have formed, it's the same thing. How do we reduce costs where we have lots of people who have little individual needs? Can we have one contract to help sort of smooth that part of this out? And I think all we are talking about with the regional market is another road of how do we get a larger buyer pool with smaller transaction costs sort of attached to it in a way that sort of makes the most sense. So I'm really excited about this. I think this is going to be a good thing for California. And we'll see what happens. But if you guys have questions about what's next on regional markets, come find me in the break. Go ahead.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So MCE and the Cal CCA Trade Association with 25 members is in strong support of the Pathways legislation for affordability reasons. And I'll tell you why. MCE serves 1.5 million customers, but across the state, CCAs are serving 14 million customers. Many of us are exceeding state goals. We actually met the state's 2030 goals for renewable content 15 years early. And we support Pathways because it will allow us to have places for our renewables to go when they're not being used and when they're being curtailed. And it'll give us access to renewables and spark renewable development all over the West in places where it's desperately needed. We have a solar facility in the Central Valley that's being curtailed so much that we're losing about $20 million a year just on that one facility. Now, if you add up the impact of all the folks that are in the same boat with curtailed resources, it's a lot of money, and that does get passed along to ratepayers. So having a market where we can trade across state lines will allow us to monetize those resources and make them more affordable for everyone.
Well, thank you. As you can maybe tell, we've sort of expanded the scope of the discussion today beyond just procurement. But as we've heard a lot throughout this conference, the questions about the future of offshore wind are very much tied to these questions of market efficiencies and transmission planning and broader resource and reliability and affordability questions. So thank you for allowing us to do that. And thank you very much to our panelists, Buck and Leuwam and Dawn and Michael. Round of applause.